Hello and welcome to InFocus with me, Curtis Hinton, on Q's News. In this episode of InFocus, we are going to be talking about the 5-year anniversary of Brexit. Brexiteers around the country just recently celebrated the 5-year anniversary since the UK left the EU. Also on the programme, we're going to be talking about a farm that Miliband has had some backlash on to do with solar energy. And finally, we're going to talk about Labour's welfare reform debate, which is coming up very, very soon. Joining me to talk about all this, we have got author and journalist David Osland, and we've got political commentator and human rights lawyer David Haigh on the programme. Thank you both for joining me today.
Hey.
Good afternoon. For coming on. It's great to have you both on. David, both David.
Good afternoon.
It's not your first time on the programme, so it's great to have you back. Let's get straight into it. Brexit, 5 years we celebrated, or maybe not celebrated. David Osland, do you think Brexit's been a success so far or a failure?
It's difficult to see how it's been a success, isn't it? I mean, even on sort of pro-Brexit commentators, it seems to have reduced GDP by a fraction of a percentage point, and that's likely to grow over the years. It's meant lower investment, it's meant fewer jobs, it's meant lower exports. So we've reached the point where only 30%, according to some opinion polls, think that leaving the EU was a good idea. What are we supposed to be celebrating?
David Haigh, what's your thoughts? Do you think Brexit's been successful so far?
I think, if we look at all the particular, for instance, if we go through each thing, where we look at the economy, we look at sovereignty, we look at, farming, etc. If we can perhaps do that soon, but, we look at all those areas, I'd say no. We certainly got Brexit, but perhaps Brexit in name only. And I think that's probably, where we are. So I would say no, it hasn't been a success. But it was doomed to fail when, it went through in the first place, and the people that was supposedly negotiating Brexit for were people that genuinely didn't believe in it.
I mean, Theresa May, who wasn't a Brexiteer, she took the first deal to the table. And then we had Boris Johnson come in, who was a surprise Brexiteer when it was announced. And then we've now got, obviously, we had Rishi Sunak, and, in between, we had Liz Truss for a very short period. But then we've now got a Labour government who aren't really for Brexit, but obviously they're probably trying to do their best to do what they can. 2029, if we had a reform government, do you think that they would deliver Brexit as promised? Do you think that's what people are wanting? David Osland?
I'm not quite sure what the phrase Brexit in name only means. I mean, if you look at this analytically, Brexit is departure from the European Union. 5 years ago yesterday, we departed from the European Union. People are saying, oh, this isn't the Brexit I voted for, but I'm afraid the obvious answer is, sorry, this is the Brexit you voted for, and this is the Brexit you've got. How do you want to make it work? How are you going to conjure up these trade deals out of nowhere when countries won't sign them? How are we going to get ones that are in the UK's advantage? I mean, admittedly, there are variables. We don't know what the new Trump administration would be amenable to, but there's no special reason to think he'll give Britain special treatment. So, come on, Brexiteers, then show us what you got.
Was this always a long-term game, Brexit? I mean, it was never going to happen overnight that the positives are all going to go through. The UK was going to go through an element of change. Do you think this was always a long-term thing to happen?
Well, I think when even Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservative Party that inflicted Brexit on Britain, admits that the government's made rather a hash of it and didn't do it with any planning. But I could never see much of an upside case in the first place. I mean, I sat down, I am a business journalist. I did write about this and how it would impact the firms I write about at the time. And while I never went along with the worst predictions of the Remain camp, the predictions that the British economy was going to fall off a cliff, I never saw that as happening. But what I did see is that it would damage the UK economy, initially by a small amount, but with a cumulative impact. That's what I thought was going to happen. And I hate to say it, but was I right or was I right?
Do you think COVID had a huge part to play in terms of the downfall, kind of especially like the last 5 years? Do you think that obviously something so unprecedented that wasn't predicted, again, something that you'd like to think would be worked into the calculations, something like that happening?
Well, it's another hobby horse of the right, isn't it? Shading off into the crazier fringes of it. I think vaccines were a plot by Bill Gates to implant microchips in each and every one of us, and that Andrew Bridgen comparing vaccines to the Holocaust. I mean, no, I think the pandemic hit all countries alike. You can't do counterfactuals in real life, but I don't see how that's made Brexit dramatically different one way or the other.
I mean, when it comes to science, the UK did rejoin the Horizon European Research Programme, which we contribute around about 2 billion annually, but historically the UK scientists get net more than majority of other countries. And I assume that's maybe down to developments within this country. David Haigh, I want to bring you in on this. Do you think that COVID potentially would have had an economical effect worse outside of the EU than if we were inside the EU?
I mean, no, effectively. I mean, it was something that we all had to go through at the same time. So I can't see that it would have had any, whether we were all together in one club or whether we were where we were in terms of Brexit. So I don't think it was any real impact on that. That's the short answer.
I mean, YouGov this week did release, maybe in celebration of the 5-year anniversary, some stats around what the UK think at the moment. 55% of Britons believe it was wrong to leave the EU, and only 30% was left thinking currently that it was right to go back, that it was right to leave. Leave voters now say 18% say Brexit was a mistake, while 66% say it was the right choice. Do you think it was just things that were promised have not and don't look to be delivered to those who voted to leave? David Haigh.
I think, I think, look, when I wasn't in a perfect world, the idea of a sovereign, completely sovereign UK outside of the EU, may be an ideal, but that's not what I think was what actually happened. And the problem that I think that I voted to remain, but I voted to remain purely on the basis of the people that were running the campaign, whether it was to leave or whether it was to remain. None of them really believed in it. We sort of, you've already mentioned with Boris Johnson, who really couldn't decide up until the last minute which side he was going to be on. So something so big and so important, you need to have people with conviction. And we didn't have any of those. The only person that we actually have at the moment is Nigel Farage, who actually believes something, whether you agree with him or you don't, he actually genuinely believes this. So, whilst, like I said at the time, I would have rather we stay in. If we're going to come out, or rather we have come out, it would have been better doing it with someone that has the passion and the energy and genuinely believes in that. And I think what we're seeing now, whether people are unhappy with it, people are saying maybe we should have stayed in, dissatisfaction everywhere, is because of that. Because you put someone in charge. It's like putting the opposition manager in charge of your football club. It does, because he doesn't really want to win, doesn't want to achieve anything, doesn't want to score any goals.
Do you think this is something that Reform is seeing as a party? They're seeing people are not necessarily fed up directly. We've only got 8% of Britons rank that the Brexit not being done as one of the biggest concerns at the moment in the UK. This is based on the YouGov poll. We obviously know it is just from a selective portion. But between you both, we'll start with you, David Haigh. Do you think that people potentially are turning to Nigel, not just because they want kind of maybe some sanity back in politics? We'll let David Osland have his say on that in a moment. But because they want Brexit actually done, the Brexit that just over half of the country voted for.
I think you are, and whether or not they're doing that because they're not actually, I don't want to say uneducated, but because that would seem rude. But like, for instance, I often commentate a lot on the ECHR. And quite wrongly, obviously, a lot of people assume wrongly that the ECHR is still part of the EU, that somehow we're still strangled by the EU. So I think there's a lot of better education that needs to happen as to, as the other day you said, as it were, when we were talking about Brexit in name only, we actually do have Brexit. It's just that a lot of people kind of still think, and I do think this, and certainly from people that I speak to down here, that they still think that there are many things that haven't happened, but actually wouldn't happen anyway with Brexit, and ECHR is one of them.
David Osland, David Haigh a moment ago just said that Nigel Farage is probably one of the only front-leading politicians who has always had the drive or the vision of what he wanted in terms of with Brexit. Do you agree with that statement?
I agree with other David's point that probably the majority of people who voted in the referendum didn't sit that down and carefully consider the macroeconomic implications of what was happening. I think the vote was an expression of discontent by people who've been frankly shafted since 1979 by 4 decades of neoliberal and capitalist governments, Thatcherite and Blairite alike. Whereas people like David Haigh and I have, probably part of the class that have done rather well in recent decades, they haven't. Their vote was a vote of discontent, and crucially, Nigel Farage articulates that discontent. And I think unless Labour starts making good, starts fixing public services, starts doing something for these cool people, then Farage will be the only gainer.
And do you think that's a good thing in regards to the country and Brexit?
Do I think it'd be a good thing to have a Farage government? Well, this is going to shock you, Curtis, but no.
I'm not shocked at all. It's a tough one when it comes to Brexit. I always stood on the firm basis of that. We should have had a deal in place that we're going to go with, and people should have voted on that deal. We should have all been, as you said, both David, education on what was actually going to be the truth of it should have been the way forward with it. It's a tough one. It is what it is. Would you, either of you, advocate for rejoining the EU? I mean, Piers Morgan this week said it's not what we wanted. It's not what the people voted for, and therefore we should have a second referendum to vote on whether we rejoin the EU. David Haigh, let's start with you.
I think because we know that we were lied to, as a country at the original time. We know that these facts, and we know that now. And nothing's ever happened to that. No one's been brought to justice over that. But in short answer, I think, yes, I think, a referendum, whether or not what we should do now would be a good one. But again, we shouldn't just be, should we go back in? Should we stay out? We need to know what the terms are, like you said, because otherwise it's just another waste of time. But yeah, but I fear that we'll probably get dragged into, lots and lots of things that won't assist us with the Labour government. But let's see.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer was over there recently kind of talking to some EU faithfuls. David Osland, what do you think? Do you think there should be a second referendum?
It's politically impossible, whatever anybody thinks about it. I don't think the electorate would. What I do think is that maybe we could look at coming to some sort of arrangement with the that gives us single market access, possibly short of rejoining the single market in full, but possibly some sort of Norway type of arrangement. I mean, ideas that Brexiteers canvassed actually during the campaign.
So something that they wanted throughout before. I mean, it was very unlikely the EU were probably going to honour that, though, right? Being such a strong member state to the Union, they would see it as more of you would get bigger countries who support the EU trying to go down that route too.
We've rather messed on our own doorstep, haven't we? You can't flip the bird to the world's largest trading bloc and then a few years later come back and say, oh, sorry, can we have all the nice bit without any payment for it? Yeah, they're going to extract the profit, and from their point of view, rightly so. I mean, if I was in charge of Brussels, I'd make Britain eat a little humble pie.
I mean, we could be talking about the collapse of the EU very soon. I mean, if the AfD get in with Germany, do you not think that we could see some of the major countries leaving the EU, David?
Germany would be the last country I could see leaving the EU, if only on the grounds that the country that has been the biggest single beneficiary of the EU has been Germany. I mean, they've done extremely well out of it economically, and certainly I don't see Friedrich Merz pulling out.
Do you believe if the AfD got it in power?
That's the AfD got in, but who's expecting the AfD to get into power? I mean, there will be, even if they emerge as the largest single party, there will be a coalition
of the opposition
against, what the Germans call a Große Koalition, there will be the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats and maybe the Greens coming together to block the AfD. So I'd file that one under ain't going to happen.
So talking about the UK rejoining the EU, 64% of Britain supports closer ties between the EU and the UK, according to this YouGov poll, whilst 55% support rejoining the EU, and 48 to 50%, so again, just under half the country, would be to rejoining the single market and the customs union, something which I think is probably maybe the easier things to get back into in terms of when it comes to trade and trying to get a simple deal across the line. Ultimately, final say on this topic, David Haigh, we'll start with you. Where do you see Brexit going within the next 5 years?
I think, we are where we are. I think what we need to do now, I mean, we need to get on with the job. We need to actually get Britain great again, for want of a better phrase. And rather than, it's very easy to think, should we join? Should we not join? What should we do? We just need to get things, it's been 5 years and still things are not moving forward in the way they should. So let's just get on with the job.
David Osland?
I think it will drift slowly out from the current situation to a slightly worse situation. As I think we might even have a consensus that negotiating some form of single market access might be the sensible way forward. But it doesn't look like this government has the political will to do that. So that doesn't look likely to me either.
Do you think a Kemi Badenoch government could?
I don't think a Kemi Badenoch government would be minded to. I mean, just to go back to the point, this isn't Brexit in name only. Welcome to real Brexit. And we are where we are, as David just said.
Do you think it'd be sorry, I know it was a final say. Do you think it'd be undemocratical to have a vote this soon on a referendum?
I wouldn't put it. I wasn't even thinking in terms of a referendum. Just a single market access arrangement. As I say, the sort of thing that was canvassed by pro-Brexit Tories during the referendum campaign. We were told we could have this. We were told we could have our cake and eat it too, couldn't we? And now it looks like we don't have any of our Madeleine cake left.
Sold a dream, as some people would say. It's something I'm sure we're going to be talking about for years and years to come, because obviously we can only see what happens as time goes by. Second on the programme this week, Ed Miliband has been in the news. He is Energy Secretary at the moment. He's been accused of breaking the ministerial code by approving the Hinton Fen Solar Park, which was a solar farm in Lincolnshire, should I say, owned by a Labour mega donor named Dale Vince. David, also, I'm going to start with you. Is there an ethical problem here?
Doesn't look like one to me. I mean, this isn't Matt Hancock giving a lucrative PPE contract to his pub landlord. This isn't Boris Johnson giving a top job at the BBC to a guy who lines up an £800,000 loan for him. And this isn't taking 15 million quid off a man who wants to shoot black women. The fact is that Britain needs renewable energy. Dale Vince is the renewable energies guy. If it's a commercial proposition and it stands up, then, what's the issue?
David Haigh, what's your thoughts? And it is Conservative MP Nick Timothy who is bringing this to the Ethics Committee. Do you think there's an ethical issue here?
I think, certainly when we look at it, it does raise an eyebrow. Now, raising an eyebrow doesn't mean that something wrong has happened. We need to see, is there a conflict? Or I think the law says, or the relevant kind of ethical regulation basically says, if there is a conflict, or if a conflict could reasonably be perceived to have arisen. Now, then you come into this, we could sit here for hours debating what is a reasonable person and how do they behave and etc. But I think, if we look at, is it reasonable to assume that potentially there could be a conflict? There probably is, because I think a lot of people reading this, and that's the reason why this is a story in the news at the moment, because people are thinking, hang on a minute, this looks a little bit interesting. Let's have a look at it. Now, one would hope that there is no conflict, because one would hope that the government and the ministers are not so stupid. But when you look at the previous administration, that's not something that you can rely on going forward. So there may well be, but I think it should be a matter of fact, and I think it should perhaps be looked at.
Well, since 2021, he has donated 5.4 million to the Labour Party. It's just such a short space of time, and quite a substantial sum. David Osland, I know you're a big fan, obviously, on anything which supports renewable energy in regards to climate change, something we didn't get to have that conversation about last time on the programme. There are locals in Lincolnshire saying that this is trashing the countryside. Is that something you're willing to potentially do if it means safer energy, cleaner energy?
As Nick Timothy pointed out, he says that this is the wrong use for agricultural land. But the way I look at it is that 70% of Britain's surface area is agricultural land. We do need renewable energy, and that looks to me the place to build it. It's certainly better to use agricultural land for these purposes that rather than land that might be usable to help meet a housing crisis, for example. So, and again, a lot of agricultural land is barely profitable for the people that farm it. So, without knowing too much about Lincolnshire and about this particular project, obviously I can't say whether it's a great choice or not, but in broad principle, build, baby, build, and build on agricultural land.
Not quite the Trump line of drill, baby, drill during his inauguration, but very similar. David Haigh, what do you think?
Version of it, yeah.
David Haigh, what do you think? Do you think that locals should be consulted, and it should be ultimately down to locals whether or not these substantial areas of land are being used for this purpose?
I think it's absolutely. I mean, it's something I'm quite familiar with down here in Cornwall. We've had, since I was a child, I remember seeing wind farms when you're all around everywhere. And now you are seeing on agricultural land down in Cornwall an awful lot of solar farms. But equally, I'm speaking to you now from something of an eco house. We're powered off a giant wind turbine in the field behind me, with Tesla batteries, water from a well, and ground source heat. So and it works. But then you do see a giant wind turbine. I can hear it. But one of the things I'm seeing, so I can see it from a kind of a perspective of living down here and seeing, in Cornwall, vast areas of land turning to solar farms. Just as I, drive to the local coffee shop, I pass a lot of them. So it's absolutely, I think, something that local people should have a say in. Because, of course, like with anything that's a big development that will change the area that they're in, they should have a say. But I think it's definitely something that we need to advance, but we need to do it with caution and make sure that the relevance to people's interests. Even with the land itself, if we build solar farms on land, some of the farmers argue that then that can damage the land forever. So I think we need to address all of those things, which we can do, and then move forward like that. But we do need renewable energy, and it does work. I mean, like I said, I'm speaking to you now on electricity from a wind turbine.
I thought I heard a buzzing in the background. David Osland, I want to go back to the ethical point. We said before there was PPE contracts given out, as you mentioned, during COVID to Matt Hancock and his friends who had no history of delivering PPE. So that is an ethical issue completely. But are we not going to raise an ethical issue in regards to there's going to be someone else who can also do this, who didn't give your party £5 million? Is that not an issue that we have? And the Labour Party could... It's almost it's selecting someone surely that's within your circle.
Well, I should add here also that David Miliband recused himself from this decision, which was taken actually by Lord Hunt, the energy minister, and quite properly. So again, I think that speaks ethically to his credit. But there will be a limited range of people capable of undertaking this project, won't they? As far as I know, and I'm not an expert on the subject matter, but Ecotricity, Vince's company, are Britain's leading company in this field. And if they have made a commercially viable proposition, then there's no reason why that shouldn't go through. If Nick Timothy wants it, then by all means, scrutinise the contract. But the onus is on the critics to show that there's anything amiss here, which has yet to be demonstrated. I'm not convinced will be.
So you think it should be down just to the scrutiny of the agreement, whether or not it actually was the best deal on the table, and that's why it was chosen rather...
Well, I mean, given that there are a limited number of companies that can do this, it doesn't look unreasonable to me. But if Timothy wants scrutiny, let's have it. I mean, but let him show that anything wrong has happened here.
I want to stay with you, David Osland, at the moment, just because this week it was Rachel Reeves and Harriet Harman came out and said that they would support a third runway at Heathrow, something that Ed Miliband has not wanted, and something that which is probably going to make him feel a bit uncomfortable. Is it something that you think is the right decision?
Well, this is crazy, isn't it? We've just been talking about how outraged people are at putting up a wind farm on farmland. Now, if you look at the third runway proposal, this is going to cost 8,000 to 10,000 people their homes. It's going to mean up to 2,000 extra flights a day. Yeah, that's right, 2,000 extra flights a day, which is obviously going to be detrimental to the local residents. I also don't believe that Britain desperately needs that extra runway. I mean, I think as a Londoner and a frequent flyer, it's only twice in my life that I've ever had to go to a continental airport like Schiphol or Frankfurt to get a flight to a city that isn't served by one of the London airports. So I'm not swung on the need for it. I think it's massively disruptive. I think it has detrimental environmental impacts, and I can't see the case without having studied the question in any depth, but it doesn't seem to stack up to me.
David Haigh, I mean, it's such a big topic, and I know within parties you've got people who support and oppose different legislation and rules, but when it comes to environment, this is a huge environmental issue in regards to aeroplanes. We can talk about renewable energy again in regards to fuel, but in 2009, Ed Miliband in Gordon Brown's government opposed to this third runway. We've now got Harriet Harman and Rachel Reeves saying that they want this runway, but they've got an energy secretary who wants to make England green, make the UK green. Is this the two narratives come out of Labour at the moment?
Possibly. I think, and you can see, and again, I don't know too much specifically on the actual details of the financial benefit or not, but I think the current government is probably looking at what is the actual benefit of doing this in terms of investment into England, in terms of provision of jobs, in terms of what other benefits financially that it may bring. Now, again, just from what I've read, I understand obviously it will have a huge environmental impact as well as impact on your social impact and on housing. Yeah. But obviously it's the job of the government of the day to balance those and come to a decision on what is the right thing to do. I lived in Dubai for 10 years and their airports, and I'm not saying that Dubai is a model country by any means, a modern state by any means. But they've now effectively, when you look at the Gulf Airlines, they've taken over control of the world airlines now. So, they are the best airlines and people land in Dubai. Now I fly a lot through the UK airports, and they are not good for all sorts of reasons, and they could be so much better. But does making them better actually help England? Does it, help the UK? Do we get, better investment? Do we make money from that? Or and then what's the damage to the environment? And no, I think the government of the day is job to make that decision.
It's a tough one. It's going to take a while anyway for it to come to play, to come into, I believe, to go ahead. I want to finally talk about the Labour welfare plan. So Labour government is preparing to implement a fundamental welfare reform. Now, this is something you've seen governments try to do time and time again, probably not to the detriment of the British people in terms of it probably hasn't always gone to plan. The focus is on rising health and disability benefits, which Rachel Reeves has announced. Is it something that's going to happen overnight, David Haigh? We'll start with you. Or is it something which, again, is a long-term plan? Is it a 5, 10, 15, 20-year plan for it to truly show its effects? Oh, I think I've just lost your sound, David. We'll start with you, David Osland, at the moment. We'll go over to you. What's your thoughts? Do you think it is a short-term thing that can just with a few different budgets here and there can come into play, or do you reckon it's a long-term plan?
Well, the thing that strikes me is the regularity with which crackdowns on benefit fraud have been announced by politicians of all parties for decades. I mean, I think the first time I remember this was from Peter Lilly in the Major government, and then, repeatedly by Blair himself, James Purnell, Ian Duncan Smith. We get it all the time. We've had it for decades. Now, if there was a substantial problem with benefit fraud in this country, I rather suspect it would have been cracked down on by now and eradicated, which leads me to believe that it's not as big a problem as it suits some politicians to paint. I also think a large part of the problem is, the state of the NHS, where hundreds of thousands of people are now not able to work and on benefits because they're waiting for surgical procedures that a better NHS would have carried out for them by now, instead of making them wait for years.
Well, to touch on that point,
I think that the biggest quick fix I was going to say from that would be sort the NHS out, bring down the benefit claimants out of work and sickness by hundreds of thousands rapidly. Let's do that. Let's start there.
I mean, you make a very good point, because the stats on that, people receiving benefits, specifically sickness benefits, cost the government around about 65 billion last year, and it's set to rise to 100 billion before the next general election. David Haigh, do we have your sound back? Let's just double check this.
Hopefully.
There we go. We are back. Do you think it is a quick fix, or do you think it's something that's going to be 5, 10, 15 years' time?
No, I mean, I think as David mentioned at the start, I mean, certainly in my living memory, there's been a crackdown every single time the government has changed. Every time, a new minister comes in, it's a crackdown on the welfare bill, get people back to work, etc. Has anything actually ever happened, or is it just the current government cooking the books, whatever government that is? Because it would be very interesting to see if the number, these things are actually being improved. What we are seeing, as you quite rightly mentioned, is that the bill is going up and up and up. Current 65 billion, and meant to go up to 100. So, but what is the solution? It's certainly not a short-term one. It's a long-term one. And particularly when you're looking at disability benefits and getting people back to work that can, how is that going to be done? And but then when you've got I think a situation in the country where it's better financially for people to stay at home and on benefits than it is for them to go to a low-paid job, that's one of the big problems that we've got.
Huge. It's a huge problem. And the issue is as well, there's so many people that could fall under the vulnerable category as well, in terms of how quick do we do this. If we are very cutthroat with it, then we're going to have some major issues with different people around the country who are going to be severely implicated with this, because they can't access the funds that they need. Like you say, if they're forced back into work and they can't do it, or if it has to be part-time, they're not affording to live. I mean, we have an issue at the moment in regards to people not being able to, the cost of living. It's definitely still going on. And stuff like this is going to just increase it even more. It is all we have time for today, unfortunately. We are at the end of the programme. So thank you both for joining me, David Haigh and David Osland. Thank you both for joining me today. So it's been a programme of 5 years on from Brexit. What's your thoughts? Do you think Brexit has been successful? Do you think it was never going to be successful in 5 years? And actually, it's a long-term gain for the UK. Let us know. You can get in contact with the programme on Q's News. Just leave your comments on our YouTube channel too. We've also been discussing today Ed Miliband and his backlash he's faced with his new solar farm and the investment behind it, and also Labour's welfare debate. There's a lot going on in the UK and the world at the moment, but here on InFocus on Q's News, we will keep you updated. Stay tuned. Stay informed, stay focused.